All right. So speaking of state of game dev, what do you see out there in our industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's really easy to sort of run into a rabbit hole, but I think we're in a pretty big shift. I think we sort of spent more than a couple of years just increasing budgets, increasing scale, increasing scope, and getting sort of more complex technology. And I think we finally hit that wall where we're back to asking sort of is this better? Is this how is this working? And if you look at sort of the Game of the Year awards, you really, I think it was pretty stark that some of the best games were from newer, smaller teams, and it's sort of like there isn't this sort of pattern that we were seeing before, where I think there was a story a couple of years back, which was about basically like double A's dying. It's basically there's indies and there's triple A's, and now I feel like we're kind of shifting back where people are really looking both as developers and as players. We're like, actually, double A is kind of awesome. Maybe we should go back. But the fundamental reasons why are running into some of the limitations that we run that you talk about on the show, as far as what makes project management and scale hard, what makes sort of keeping a game relevant after X years hard. That we know there's just problems that occurred at AAA that I feel like have sort of surprised a lot of people, where teams like that used to be very prestigious are suddenly like not delivering like they used to, and there's this question of sort of like is it scale itself that's the trouble? Is it sort of the mindset we bring to scale? And I think we're all kind of scrambling for answers. I'm getting pinged by my buddies with sort of philosophical questions at a much higher rate than I would expect, and I'm sort of it's a bit sad in some ways, but it's also, I think, healthy that we're looking and sort
Yeah.
of thinking like, hey, does this really work? Why do we do this? Is this what we want game development to look like? Is this what it needs to look like? I think the biggest change that people kind of slept on and sort of snuck up on everybody is the consequences of big games getting stickier over time, both
Mm-hmm.
in mobile and in sort of console and PC. I think we underestimated the consequences of people spending more time in fewer older games. And that sort of reached a critical mass where suddenly, if you're a player and you have a lot of games to play, the likelihood that you are playing your older favorite game is increased just enough that suddenly new games are fighting over scraps, as far as player time, and that was sort of a surprise. I think people were kind of shocked that how much that sort of changed sort of how you compete, how you build something, how you market. On top of that, it's just raised the bar. I think it's more fresh in people's heads how much fun they have playing their favorite older game, and that's raising expectations of sort of how interesting or how high quality a new game needs to be. And people are just getting more sophisticated as to sort of how they spend their time. So it's like, I think, healthy in the sense that if you're making a game, you have to sort of think that much more critically about what makes it special and sort of what it means to people. But it's also sort of thinking about how those player habits might sort of change how you make your game. Because if I mean, you do this, I do this, where sort of suddenly there's a minor update to your old favorite game. That's the competition as a new game you have. It's sort of like small change in old game versus your entire project happening sort of, similar period of time. And I think it's we're still digesting it. I think it's we're seeing the consequences broadly, but we're still sort of doing the detective work to figure out like, well, wait a minute, or is the way people consume games really changed that much? It's like, yeah, right underneath our feet, it's been changing.
Yeah. I liked how you described it too. It's almost okay. I haven't actually read the book, but Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point.
Yeah.
Um, and it feels like it has that type of vibe to it, where underneath everything else, there was this more and more time was being spent on older and older projects or products, games. And suddenly we reach this point where, wait a minute, any new game now is not going into a space where it only has to compete with the other new games. It has to compete with every good game from the last 20 years. And that's like, what? You know, I see you look at Counter-Strike numbers over time on Steam, and it's just like it's close to the biggest it's ever been. And you're like, wait a minute, what in the world's like, what is going on? It's such a weird world to live in, and it was just subtle, and I think a lot of it did happen over the last 5 or 10 years because that was really when I mean, you had some MMOs before that, like you had Counter Strike before that, but that was really when you started seeing some of these live services just put a lot of money and effort. Maybe 15 years is a better frame for that, 10, 15 years, where you just started seeing a lot of effort going into how do I sustain this over a long period of time.